happy to be with everybody. At the moment, I'm not sure. We are sitting surrounded by fires. That's what everybody needs to know. So I'm sitting in emergence at the moment. And for some reason or other, I cannot see anybody, but you can see my screen, and I can't see chat. So
we'll monitor that for you.
So you will need to handle that for me. Thank you so much.
Got it.
Jesse, you really set it up brilliantly for me to be talking, and everybody just have awareness that the kind of enthusiasm and stagecraft that Jesse brought to it, I cannot match. So love what happened, and do want to lead you into and introduce you to some concepts and things that we are working with at CRI Global. The place where I want to point you as we start is some of what Jesse talked about as well, is that we created some of this work starting probably 20 years ago, and it really is an attempt to add relationship to modern systems thinking. So just about everything that we do has to do with the relationship system, whether it is a team, a partnership, an enterprise. For us, the focus and the client, if you will, actually is the system itself. It's the relationship system. And it actually is that web of connection between the members of the system. So there's been, in the work that we've done, we have a lot of empirical evidence in terms of what works and how things are playing out in the field of team coaching. And for us, really, it's become really clear that we want to shift the focus from me, which is a lot of the area that professional coaching is working on and executive coaching, to we, that takes us more into the partnership, pairs situation, to the system of it, which is that larger system, whether it is, and again, whether it is the team or whether it's the enterprise itself or whether it is global warming, it's the focus on that larger unit. So for us, it really is about expanding the range of intelligences from the emotional intelligence to a larger, bigger focus. And in doing that, we really focused on and hold that systems are naturally creative, generative, and that it has answers. It's some of what already is present in modern systems thinking that says, once the system is revealed to itself, it will self-correct. It'll do the thing that needs to happen. We'll get deeper into that in just a moment. But I wanted also to share with you that we were heavily influenced by research that happened at MIT Sloan several years ago, that they really were looking at what creates collective intelligence. Not the sum total of IQ, but what creates intelligent teams that are functioning together. And they really came up with that there is a general effectiveness. There is a team intelligence that is beyond the individuals itself. And those are some of the places that we want to work and play with you. And it's interesting, some of you may know the research, but if you look at what creates collective intelligence, one of the, I think it's the top one that they found, is that collectively intelligent teams have social sensitivity. They are aware of what is happening with other team members. And so the strong emotional impact that Jesse brought, the presence on the web and in virtual environments that came from my South African colleagues in the first presentation, those are the things that when you have a team that have a lot of that kind of awareness, that's one of the key factors in creating collective intelligence on teams. The other thing that we started talking about, I think Jesse referred to it as well, is that the groups or the teams that came together and they were pulled together, not selected, but they were pulled together. The teams that did best were the teams that collaborated, and it was a roundtable conversation rather than a leader dominating the conversation. That's significant for some of the work that that we're looking at when we looking at agility and we're looking at the environments that you are working. So that piece, that it's a roundtable conversation and it's not dominated by one person that has the answers. As a matter of fact, they found that one of the things that was very useful was on the teams where there were people that had no clue about the topic that they're working on, often were some of the most important team members because they brought a fresh look to it. They were asking stupid questions, but these were actually the questions that had the people that were experts in the subject think twice. It was that re-looking at what we assume. And then the third one that always gives me a little giggle is that teams that had more women seem to have been more collectively intelligent. And I think that ties to the social sensitivity. And I know that most of the gentlemen on this call fall in the higher, closer to the feminine side. So, but for us as women, just know that there is evidence that we can help create greater collective intelligence.
You got it. Beautiful.
We're back.
Thank you very much, everyone, for your patience.
Thank you. And here's the thing, it's going to set us up beautifully for where we're actually going. So we talked about collective intelligence and the research finding. So let me quickly talk to you about the evolution that we're looking at, the shift from me to we to that bigger piece. So you know emotional intelligence as well as I do. So don't have to do too much with you there. But if we then look at social intelligence, that really is ESI, right from the beginning, have been sort of covered together as the one leading to the next. We're looking at relational systems intelligence, and really that it is the ability to interpret oneself as an expression of the system. And that what happens to individuals is not only there we go. That what happens to the individual is not only personal, but it also is an expression of the system. So from where we are looking, we're really looking at emotional intelligence as that view from my land, my experience. Social intelligence, as like you well know, it really is expanding it to awareness of others. But then when we're talking about the relationship systems intelligence, it really is that piece that has us look from a very, very different point of view. And while I'm not a Scrum master or an Agilist, I think it is that meeting of the relationship systems intelligence, that place with what is happening in the Agile world, that is such a powerful connection. So I'm going to introduce you to what we have crafted over the years as the principles of relational systems intelligence. And I want for you, as we begin to look there, I would love for you to begin to have in your mind a client that you are working with, whether it is a team or a partnership or even an individual client that you are doing your work with as an Agile coach. I want for you to begin to think of clients, because in a little bit, we're going to begin to look at what does that look like when we begin to apply the principles to that. So the first principle that we are talking about is that each relationship system has its own unique identity. You've actually seen it this morning, this whatever the time of days in your land. You have seen that as you looked at presenters. everybody is a presentation to Agile 100, using the same kinds of situations, some in partnerships, but you could feel how each one of those presenters made a very different impression and impact on you. So we'll talk more about that, but each relationship system has its own unique identity, and we believe that is the place where we can get information from, and that we more and more need to begin to look at what that information is. We'll go more deeply into that. The other piece that we are talking about is that every member of the relationship system is a voice of the system. It is an expression of the system. It's not just the individual speaking, but it also is a systemic event. We'll come back to that as well. So we're talking that systems are naturally intelligent, generative, and creative. We'll talk more about that too, but it's not always easy to believe and think about when we look at what is happening globally, whether you think in terms of politics or whether you think in terms of global warming crisis. What is generative from this systemic perspective may be very different from what we experience from the individual perspective in this now. So one of the things that we have a slogan that we're talking about, that you can help an elephant that's trying to get up, but you cannot help an elephant that's trying to fall down. So think about the teams that you're working with. Think about where are the places where it's trying to get up, and you can support and work with that. Where are the places that things are trying to fall down? And sometimes that may be the place to get out of the way. So just that piece, and from this now experience, it's very hard and very difficult to consider. But one of the best examples that we can see in nature of that is when we think of the California redwoods. The redwoods actually need to burn down in order to create new growth. So there are situations in which, if we're looking at this now, it may not feel so good. But if we hold a bigger systemic view, what are the systems that actually needs to break down in order for something new to emerge? Not an easy one, but continue to hold that as a perspective as well. Relationship systems rely on roles for execution of functions. Jesse talked a lot about different roles as well. And part of our challenge is that we hold that roles, outer roles, does belong to individuals that are assigned into it. However, the presence of leadership is not limited to that one individual. So we do hold roles and leadership roles, even your coaching role, as a role that also belongs to the system. It's not just personal to you. So we'll dive a little bit into that to see what is it that we can then, and how can we work with that. This last one is actually one of my favorites because it's the one that we are engaged with most often, is that systems are in a constant state of emergence. It's always in the process of expressing the next thing. The question is, are we reacting to it, or can we create from it? So the place where I now want to have, just for you to have a think about, is as we look at each one of these principles, think about the first principle we're talking about. And if you can and want to go to chat with this and somebody can help catch what's happening there. When you think about different systems that you are working with, what are some of the unique, if you give a metaphor for that team system that's the client that you're working with, again, whether it's a partnership or whether it is a team. What are some of the metaphors that you will use to describe that system? Put some examples in there. What are some metaphors that you can describe the unique identity that actually is that system?
So we have a few coming in, Marita. So pack of wolves, jazz band, tribe, freshman class, orchestra, neighborhood.
Right. Can you see how you might need to work differently with a pack of wolves than with the orchestra? I had a conversation. I had one of my Agile friends and I a while back had a conversation about, well, there's management teams, and a management team is a management team, or a marketing team is a marketing team. The best example that I could come up with was that if you think about chocolate cake is recognizable, it's a cake. But I probably will challenge anybody to say that they have had chocolate cake and it all tastes the same. Somebody just put a little bit more sugar in, somebody likes it just a little bit, whatever. So when you compare your client systems, you may work with 4 management teams. But think about how each one of them is different, has its own personality. How does that impact how you approach them? I'm thinking of when somebody says pack of wolves, there's a team that I'm working with that's very much like a pack of wolves. They bring greatness together, but boy, watch out if anything threatens what is, there's a merging together and it's very difficult to get in. So how do I work differently with that from a team where there's not a lot of cohesion? I may use similar tools. I may use the similar approaches, but it is different. If I really want to meet them where they are, I need to meet them in their identity, their unique personality. So think about that, consider that when you are thinking of that client team or client that you're working with, and we'll go deeper. Hold that same team in mind when we look at the next one. That is, today is not my day. For some reason or other, my screen now won't share. That's
Okay, so it's not
that
sharing.
goes.
Oh, got it.
Yeah,
Okay.
again, yeah, you all need to know that talk about emergence. I think it's we'll get more there when we talk about that 5th principle. That if we don't pay attention to the signals of emergence, that's when it becomes an emergency. And I'm sitting in a climate crisis emergency at the moment. We virtually can't see the sun, and within 3 miles from us, everything is burned down. Entire towns taken out, thousands of people homeless. We just barely got our internet back. So some of what you are sitting with me with is the emergency of climate crisis. And let's dance with it. We talked a little bit about the systems that is naturally intelligent, generative, and creative. The question then is, when we're looking at what is happening, for example, with climate change at the moment, it's very difficult to see the generative and creative in what's happening, except when we begin to look at something like the pandemic. When closures were forced by the pandemic, we saw a whole different scene emerging from what's happening in nature. We saw smog disappearing. We saw all sorts of you will remember from way in the beginning. So if we look at the bigger picture of what is happening, there may be some breakdown, but somewhere there's also some emergence that comes from that. This is the one that I want to spend some time with you. And I'm curious also because of, Jesse, some of the stuff that you talked about earlier. When you think of teams that you are working with, can you see or relate the places where leadership often is expressed and held by the leader, but there also are wisdom voices that a lot of the time bring the insight that doesn't necessarily live in the outer role of the leader? Anybody? Examples of that you can think of. And while people think, some of you on the call may know the story I'm about to share. Several years ago, we were in a World Work Process event with Ani Mendel in Switzerland. We had the entire facility to ourselves. And on the fourth day, where we had a group of, I think we had a total of 240 people or whatever in the facility, we ended up in a process that we, the facilitators, including Mendel and his wife, Amy, everybody was screaming. Everybody was upset. Everybody was angry with everybody. It was mayhem, and we could not control what was happening. At that moment in time, a young girl, Down syndrome, I think she was 6 or 7 maybe, walked into the facility. She walked into the facility and she started touching people and going, "Shh, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay." I promise you, 4 minutes into it, that entire room of 240 people were steadied. A young Down syndrome child did what world-renowned facilitators plus 12 of their top assistants could not do. That is an example where leadership is a role that belongs to the system. I want for you to really search and look. Where are the places where in the teams that you're working with, you may be looking at the leader, you may be looking in a certain direction, but you're surprised because the answer sometimes comes from somewhere else. What are some of the examples that you have of that you may be able to share? Anybody?
So we've got that posted in the chat. We're just waiting to see if there's any that come through here. We had one system role of the skeptic was one.
Yes. Here's one of the challenges when we talk about that is that, who was it that said, Daniel Pink or somebody that said, you can fire the person, but you cannot fire the role. So skeptic is a role that belongs to the system. And somebody, depending on their own profile or style, may well be the person that actually steps into that role. And we think it's personal to that person. That is the troublemaker, the disturber, but that actually is a role that belongs to the system. So I think it's one of the places where, and when we look at that second principle, that is that every member of the system is the voice of the system, that know that personal profile play a role. Doesn't matter what profile you are looking at or selecting. One way or the other in profiles, I come out as a danger type or a rebel or whatever. So are there certain situations that I will most often be the one that speak out? Probably, because it is profile. And your personal impact is something that will always be there. However, what is being brought to the front by the skeptic? What is being brought to the front by the disturber, by the nurturer, is a systemic event from a relationship systems perspective. So how do you look at that content, no matter how irritating it is, and see it as systemic information? So from that perspective, hold roles not only as the outer role that needs to have the leadership, but that leadership also is a role that belongs to the system and is a systemic event. And that other roles that are leveraged and expressed by people are actually systemic events. And if you see repetitions of it, then you know that is something that is trying to get to attention. And that is the piece that unless you work with it, layoffs may help momentarily, but that voice is going to come back. So systems rely on roles for executive function, and very often it, or most of the time, it actually is a systemic event. If we go to the fifth principle, it's the one I think that we are dramatically are living in at the moment. If you think of the year 2020, it absolutely is the year that showed global emergence and being taken hostage by it in a way that certainly is unprecedented in our lifetime. So systems are in a constant state of emergence. And like I said earlier, if we don't pay attention to the signals of emergence, that is when it becomes an emergency. We see it in climate change. Signals are there. We're still not paying attention. It's becoming an emergency. There's ways in which we can even see it in the pandemic. So if I now come back from the global view and again ask you to take some time and to the client team that you thought of in the beginning and that you have in your mind, can you write down some of the emergence, that is what you are working with and noticing? What are some of the emergence that you are working with in the clients that you are engaged with? And again, what was said by a previous speaker from the coaching perspective, we don't have an agenda, it's the client's agenda. But from our perspective as organization and relation systems coaches, we dance between the hats of coach, consultant, because we have content expertise in what's going on in the relationship systems. And part of it is our job to create awareness of as well. So from the client's agenda perspective, what is the emergence that they came to you with? That's why they hired you. And what are some of the signals that are repeating, but that is not being worked with? And again, anybody want to share that in chat so that we have some more ideas about what's happening?
We've got a few things coming through in the chat there, Marita.
Yeah.
So one of them, increased need to monitor. That was one. Individuals feeling stuck in roles and not able to grow. less face-to-face.
I want to pick up on that individuals stuck in roles. At the moment, I really wanted to share with you, I assume, a lot of your knowledge as a coach and as Agile, as Scrum Masters. I wanted for you to have a framework from which you can begin to look at what tools and skills do you use when. I would also love to offer some from our perspective that when you're looking at that people stuck in roles as a repeating signal, which is where role nausea shows up, which is what we're talking about, and where breakdown shows up in the end. One of the ways that you can work with that is there's a tool that we use in teams where we talk about lands work. So what is happening in the land or the territory of accounting is very different from what happens in the land or the territory of marketing. So it's one of the reasons why we so often see that marketing and sales to some extent, but more so marketing and accounting very often are in a clash or there's some stress. Because in the land of accounting, there's a right way. It's called budget. And not very often do we realize that budget also is a dreaming part. But accounting is the place that most often will say no, because it's not in the budget. The land of marketing is very much about, there's got to be a different way. Let's try something different. And that usually costs money. So if we can do an activity or a conversation where we have the land, the territory of marketing speak to what is important for them. What are their challenges? What is it that they want accounting to know about what's happening? Whether it is the person that holds the role of CFO or the person that holds the role of marketing director, even if we put those two in the conversation, let them speak from their roles and then let them shift, reverse roles. Let them visit one another's land, gain understanding. Because from that understanding, from that insight, we can build a very different dialogue from this, different from this siloed expression that we've had so far, where everybody is fighting for their own side and there's not a lot of exchange and influence from one another. Other emergences of signals that might bring us to emergency that you can see.
Marita, you're just looking for some of the things that people have put in the chat on that?
Yep.
Laura? Okay.
Yep.
What was some of the other ones we had here? Friendship culture is listed as one here. So people letting each other off the hook, so not keeping accountable. Open and honest conversation emerging instead of water cooler talk. Fear of others' perceptions.
What are some of the, if anybody has questions about how to work with this, I'm totally open for that. One of the suggestions that we also make sometimes is, Jesse, I think also talked about we have to fail in order to improve. So one of the things that we've started doing in some of the teams that we're working with is to actually have what we call failure conversations. One day a week, the conversation that they're in is about where did we fail this week and what are we learning from it? So again, it's the failures that often bring us what people see as the signals for something that is not good or it's a failure. And actually part of what we're doing is looking for the places that we can innovate from. So failure conversations are powerful ways that we can play with and work with these things. So the 5 principles of RSI, really want for you to have a look, keep an eye on these, and then begin to play with, if you look at what's happening with the team that you're working with and coaching, how do you pay attention to that unique identity? We actually don't treat 2 human beings the same, even if it's our best friends. We know what we meet them in their personality frame. How do you do the same thing with the team that you're working with or the individual that you're working with? So look at each one of these principles and begin to use that as a frame through which you can view some of how you can use your tools and the pieces that you are working with in a very different way. So one of the things that I wanted to share with you then is that we hold that there's a model from which you can work. And it really is about, here are the principles of relationship systems intelligence. That's the basic principle that is guiding everything that we do. Just talked about some of those. But the principle is the theoretical model. What then are the tools that we can use? What are the tools that you have that you can use in order to express the work, as you can read them from the perspective of your own relationship systems intelligence and that of the team? What are the tools that you can use? And you can't use tools without having skills. So whether the tools you have in your pocket, what are the skills that you use to use those tools more effectively? Because from that comes, we start with conscious competence, and then we go to unconscious competence. And I know that a lot of people on this call today sit in conscious as well as unconscious competence. I want for all of us to wake up again and begin to re-examine and have conscious and intentional application for how we execute and why are we moving with the thing that we're moving with. I bet that if you look at any intervention or action that you have made with clients, it has been because you've seen one of the principles in action. And then you went with a tool, then you got a skill, and that's the competency that you're bringing that is making you a relationship systems worker. So I want to empower and I want to challenge. Have a look at these and see where it goes and see what you use and how you play with it. There's a little piece here about the Agile Manifesto, and I think it's one of the meeting places between our work in RSI and Agile is the shift from individuals interactions to over process and tools. I want to add that piece to it that is dance beyond the individuals and interactions and begin to go to the relationship system itself. What does it know that its members don't know? We're going to play a little bit with that in a moment. We've talked a lot about that it's no longer so much about following a plan, and that Agile, what I admire and really learn from is that you are responding to change. The piece that I would like to bring is to normalize it and go, that's how systems work. So again, from this perspective, find the ways that you can see the system. Who is always sitting next to whom? Who is always talking first? See the constellation of how they organize themselves. Hear them by listening to each voice of the system as an expression of that whole system. And sense the system simply means you are aware of what's happening in the emotional field. What is going on? What is the weather while they are in this conversation? I know we are going low on time. I have one activity that I want to guide you through. We are at the end of this morning's of this set of presentations. It's the second day of the event. You all are here because of Scrum Alliance. I want for you to do some inner work. Check in with yourself and imagine that you are sitting in a conversation with Scrum Alliance itself. The system, the entity that is Scrum Alliance as you relate to it and interact with it. Imagine that you are sitting in its seat. Ask it, what does it want from you? You are the Scrum Master. You have said yes to the work that you said yes to. What does it want from you? What does it know that you have forgotten? And write some of that in the chat box for everybody to see. What does Scrum Alliance want from you? What does it know that you have forgotten? And I see a raised hand. And Brock, help again. What shows up?
Yeah, I'm just looking here. Just trying to see if we can see whose hand was raised. Let's see here.
Transform the world of work. Amplification. Transformation. Somebody said $signs for certs and membership.
Yeah.
My brain. My heart. Be part of the engine.
Yeah.
Embrace agility. Don't just implement Scrum. I like this one, to be an ambassador for truth.
An ambassador for truth.
Yeah.
Nice.
Engagement and evangelism.
Uh-huh.
Create better coaches. That's a good one. Helping build a culture that brings value to others.
That's great.
Partnering. Develop the best of you to contribute growth to others.
Great.
Propagate agility to work.
Thank you. I really want to challenge and invite you. We're not going to go there. I want to challenge and invite you to sit in this question with whatever it is that you are focused on. If you yell and scream about the pandemic, sit down, have a conversation with the pandemic. I can't tell you how many conversations I've had in the last 6 days with fire and with global climate change. It has been kicking my proverbial butt for non-action. So dare to be in that conversation. Dare to be in a conversation with a client team that is your most challenging. Have a conversation with the team in this way. Have a conversation with the enterprise in this way. I'm having a conversation with that zero that is above Lucas's face at the moment, and I want to say thank you. If you're interested in anything about what we're doing, we have a presence throughout the world. And I want to leave you with, I always do this. I was born in South Africa during the apartheid era, and the Ubuntu saying that if you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. If there's time left and there's any questions, I'm happy to respond. And I want to say thank you for bearing with the stuff that's happening in my low bandwidth at the moment, and for all the kerfuffle at the beginning. Thank you for sitting in it. I think we were sitting together in the world that we're occupying at the moment, where nothing works out the way we think it will. How do we dance with that rather than react to it?